Okay, so we are toward the end of chapter 1. And what we're up to discussing is the 4 elements that are the composition of our animal soul, and in essence, the composition of everything else. Also our godly soul, also all spiritual, both godly and not, and the physical. They all come from the same 4 elements of fire, earth, wind, and water. We look inside, the Alter Rebbe describes them in terms of the animal soul, which of course is what we're discussing here. So we're 3 lines from the bottom. We met a bos kol hamidos ra'os, and from her, from the animal soul, come all the negative traits, from the 4 negative elements that she's comprised of. I mean, the godly soul is also comprised of these 4 elements, but in their godly, holy, positive manifestation. Dahainu, meaning to say, kas v'gaiva yisod ha'esh. Well, the element of fire, we said fire, earth, wind, water. So the element of fire, that gives us the traits of kas and gaiva, of anger and arrogance. Anger and arrogance, as we can understand, come from the same root, shenagva l'mayla, because they're both rising above, like the fire flickers above. And all of these 4, we will see the focus is on movement. So fire goes upward, just as the arrogance, just as the anger. But tailos hata'anugim, and the desire for pleasures, misod hamayim, from the element of water. Why? Because water is what allows the pleasures of this world to grow, to flourish. You need water for the plant life, for things to grow, and water flows downward. As our pleasures, generally, are from the animal soul, are lowering us. We're lessening our stature as man to animal, and to lessen that as we're pursuing the physical pleasures of this world. The hailus, the leitzanos, the hisparos, and just emptiness, scoffing words, boasting words, nothing words. All of these are various versions of nothing words. Misad haruach, from the element of wind, makes a lot of noise. The atzlos, misod ha'afar, and laziness and depression, sadness, depression, from the element of earth. We just went through and turned to the next page. We're now at the very last part of chapter 1 of Tanya. Last little bit left. We just went through the 4 foundational elements from which everything is created. All the physical, fire, earth, wind, water, right? We think of it as fire, earth, wind, water. We have the solid, the earth. We have the water, the liquid. We have the wind, the gas. And we have the fire, the energy that moves something from one strata to the other, from one state, solid, liquid, or gas, to the other. So fire, earth, wind, water, our physical world. Fire, earth, wind, water, our spiritual world. Our spiritual world on the side of the animal, on the klipa side, the side which is not reflecting godliness. Fire, earth, wind, water, as we'll say, also comprising our godly soul on the godly side. It all goes back to fire, earth, wind, water. So, starting with what the Rebbe writes, which is the animal, as I said, we see here the focus is on the movement. And that is in general true with Hasidus. Very often when we're looking at something, we're looking at the direction, at the movement. So fire flickers upward, water flows down, wind goes from side to side, and earth is stationary. The flickering upward of fire is representing the traits of arrogance, of anger, of ego. The pleasure in one's importance, right? The arrogance and the anger go hand in hand, because in essence, anger is an expression of your arrogance. Since you think so highly of yourself, how could this happen to me? How could this person treat me like this? How could they not be giving me more, whatever? So anger, expressing the arrogance, the ego, that's the fire, right? The anger, the arrogance, taking up a lot of space. Somebody once came to the 3rd Lubavitcher of the Tzemach Tzedek and said, Rebbe, wherever I go, people step on me. And the Tzemach Tzedek replied, because you put yourself all over the place. So wherever someone's going to step, there you are. So that's the fire element, the pleasure in one's importance. The wind is like moving, making a lot of noise. That's, as the Rebbe said, boasting, idle words, empty words, like stupid words. words that make a lot of noise and don't really say anything, right? Some people, maybe you know somebody like that, the pleasure of the sound of their own voice. They don't have to actually be saying anything, but the pleasure of the sound of their own voice. Some people like to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Men claim all women are like that, but really within women, we know women and men that love the sound of their own voice. That's the wind element. It's not the pleasure of how important I am. That's the fire. It's the pleasure in convincing you I'm so important. That's the wind. And that's also one of the 4 elements that the animal soul is comprised of. Then we said water. Water flows down. And that's like us denigrating ourselves, lowering ourselves, connecting to that which is below us. Of course, there's many pleasures in this world. And we're here talking obviously not about the godly pleasures, because then this wouldn't be on the side of the animal. We're talking about the physical pleasures. And in general, physical pleasures are man lowering himself. Most physical pleasures are fairly animalistic. They're appealing to our senses. We, of course, think of food as an obvious culprit, but it's not only food. There's many, many, many other physical pleasures. The senses, and it's lowering ourselves. It's the water, the flowing downward. And then there's the earth. The earth isn't moving. It's not going up, and it's not going to the side, and it's not going down. And that stationary, that's like almost, in a sense, the worst. So any one of these, of course, could be very crippling. The sadness, the laziness, the really here laziness as an expression of that like deep depression, that deep pain, that deep sadness, you're stuck. Of course, later in Tanya, we spend many chapters on combating sadness, because obviously the Alter Rebbe views it as, in a sense, the most damaging of all of these. But at this moment, we're sketching out, this is the animal soul. Now again, the animal soul of a Jew, and we will, probably not today, but possibly, compare to the animal soul of a non-Jew, but the animal soul of a Jew is coming from that level of evil, of blockage of godliness that we call klipas noiga. And as we've explained, klipas noiga means there's a barrier, there's a film, a klipa. Klipa is literally a shell, a husk. There's a film over the godliness, but there's noga. There's light that's shining through it. I can see the sun. I can see the shine. I can see the rays through the barriers. Which means, in the practical sense, that any item that receives this vitality from klipas noiga has the potential for me to use it to serve God. Again, and we have said this before, but it's very, very significant, so it's worth saying again. Everything in our world has godliness, is godliness. If it wasn't godliness, it wouldn't be. The worst, the most horrible, the all godly energy. But godly energy could be trapped behind such thick barriers that we have no ability to access that godliness. The only thing we can do with it really is say no. And that's how we help it. That's how we help release it. That's how we crush the barriers around it. That's how we refine and thin away the barriers around it. So if you're tempted to do something wrong, because anything that God said no or the rabbi said no, by definition is receiving its life force from absolute klipa, from these absolute walls around God's energy. So if I'm tempted to gossip and say no, if I'm tempted to not be so honest and say no, if I'm tempted to do something I'm not allowed to do and say no, I'm crushing to a certain degree the walls blocking, obscuring God's energy trapped in that forbidden whatever. Klipas noiga, we said, the walls are permeable, right? It's like pores that things can get through. So as such, klipas noiga represents an opportunity. I could use this to serve God. Anything, as we said, if it's forbidden, klipas meis. If it's a mitzvah, godliness. Most of the world is not forbidden, and most of the world is not a mitzvah. Most of the world is opportunity, challenge, potential, possibility. Most of the world gets its energy from klipas noiga. So if I have that apple, an apple's not a mitzvah. An apple's not a transgression. It's potential. It's klipas noiga. It's not on the side of kedusha. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, literally, we spoke about this term sitra achra, right? And we said we have sitra dikdusha and sitra achra. Those are Aramaic. The words end with an aleph. Sitra dikdusha, God side, anything of holiness, like your godly soul, like Turen. Sitra achra, the other side, anything that receives its life from the forbidden, blocked off, stuck, forbidden klipas tmeos, and anything that receives its life force through klipas noiga is on sitra achra, the other side, because it's not yet God's side. So that innocent little apple is sitra achra. It's not God's side. You didn't do anything with it. It's not forbidden, and it's not godly, so it's receiving its vitality from klipas noiga, and it's on the other side. And if it merits that a Jew takes that apple and makes a blessing and eats it and uses the energy to serve God, whoa, that apple moved because it's klipas noiga. There's a potential to move, and now it's on sitra dikdusha. It's on God's side, and now its energy got shifted and changed, and it elevated from klipas noiga to kedusha, to godliness. So we know all that. Why am I reminding you? Because our animal soul is klipas noiga. Meaning we keep coming back to these very basic foundational concepts because you have to really, really, really understand them because they're really relevant to us. Because I am a composite of kedusha, of klipas noiga, and of klipas tmeos. My godly soul is kedusha. It's one of the only examples we can give of kedusha is a godly soul. My evil inclination is klipas tmeos. Absolutely forbidden, even though it's an angel. Cannot access that energy at all. The way I use it is by destroying it. That's the only way I can access that energy is by destroying it. And my body and animal soul are klipas noiga. So reminding about klipas noiga is to now take those parameters and apply them to our animal soul. So we just said, I just taught, that the animal soul comes from a combination of spiritual fire, earth, wind, water, and its negative elements. And fire is the anger, the ego, the arrogance. And wind is the boasting and the idle words and loving the sound of your own voice and wanting to convince people of your importance. And water is denigrating oneself to just physical pleasures. And earth is depression, laziness. These are all sounds like very negative things. But it's klipas noiga. It's my animal soul. And it's important to understand that anything in my animal soul by definition can be utilized for God. Because the animal soul of a Jew is klipas noiga. And just like that apple is klipas noiga, and of course you could do something negative with an apple. You could steal it. You could eat it on Yom Kippur. You could throw it at someone. Or you could make a blessing and eat it and use the energy to serve God. It's potential. So my animal soul is the same potential. Of course, everyone's soul is a different combination of fire, earth, wind, water. But let's be simplistic. Let's say someone has a lot of fire. They're very arrogant. Well, that's obviously very bad. Arrogance is like the root of all evil, right? Anger is idolatry. It's setting yourself up as a God. Like there's God, but then there's you, the God. Horrible. And it could come from a lot of fire in your animal soul. But it's in your animal soul, and that means potentially you could use it for God. For example, if a person would have such an ego that would compel them to serve God because they'd be embarrassed about themselves to not. I don't want to, lower myself and to do this common sins that other people are doing because I think more highly of myself. So you're like playing with your animal soul. You're like sort of manipulating it to take that ego, which is not good, but to use it for good. If someone loves the sound of their own voice and then they become a Torah teacher, they become an emissary, a shliach. Well, they have to talk a lot. They enjoy making a good impression on people. They enjoy talking and being listened to, but they're using it for God. So it's starting off as klipas noiga. It's potential. But you can, since it's klipas noiga, you could take that potential and use it for God or the other direction. It says in the Talmud that a moihel, a ritual circumciser, one who does the brit milah, the circumcision, a shoichet, a ritual slaughterer, one who slaughters an animal according to Jewish law, and a murderer all have the same nature. They all have a nature of spilling blood. This is from the Talmud. But the murderer is spilling blood, obviously, in a, as we would call it in our context, klipas tmeos way, in a very evil way. A shoichet is spilling blood in a positive way. He's slaughtering animals for human consumption as God wants. And a moihel, one who does the circumcision, he's spilling the blood in the most godly way, It's a mitzvah. It's a commandment. It's a service of God. He's making something godly by spilling this blood. So the nature of spilling blood, we wouldn't think of it this way, but basically we're saying it's klipas naiga. It's an animal soul issue. It could be moved to absolute evil in a murderer. It could be moved to absolute godliness in someone who uses that nature to circumcise. It's the same nature. So when we're looking at our own animal soul and we're identifying, fire, earth, wind, water, we're trying to understand ourselves. We all probably have some bit of an obsession trying to understand ourselves. Obviously, we're the most important person we got to figure out. When we understand our animal soul, it means there's potential. In other words, we have, in general, in our spiritual service, we have two roads of serving God in terms of how we deal with evil. Kabbalistically called iskafia and ishapcha. Iskafia is crushing the evil. Ishapcha is transforming the evil. Now here, when we say evil, we're talking about the animal soul of a Jew, which means we're talking about klipas naiga, which is in the realm of something I could crush or I could transform. Because we said klipas naiga, we have the ability to move it to God. So if someone, I think many abilities, someone has an ability, has a talent, has a gift, has a pleasure, has a desire, and they might not see any way of using this for God, and it might be a distraction for God, and they might distraction from the service of God, and they might think, well, the best thing is to crush it, put it in a closet, lock it up, throw away the key. That's called iskafia, crushing the evil, and that might be the best thing to do with it. But since it's from the animal soul, there's something even higher one can do with that, and that's called ishapcha, utilizing this nature itself to serve God. If someone, let's say, was not religious and was, you can think of a million examples, was an entertainer, was an artist, was anything, and then they became religious and they're like, oh, there's no place for this in serving God, so I'm going to put it in the closet. I'm going to do iskafia. I'm going to crush it. This is part of my animal soul that clearly is a distraction between me and God, and in the past put me in very unholy environments. Maybe when one gets stronger in their service and they're not as scared of just slipping under back to their bad habits, they could open up that closet and say, well, this is something God gave me. If God gave me a gift and I'm not using it, that's a waste. Why would God give a gift for me to shove it in a closet? Maybe I can use this gift and figure out a way to use whatever, fill in the blanks, to serve God, because it's klipas naiga, because it's from my animal soul. Because it's not innately forbidden. I just used it in a forbidden way. But I could take art, music, dance. As we said, you could take ego and use that to serve God. You could. You could say, take loving the sound of your own voice, being a performer, and use that to serve God. You could take beauty and use that to serve God. If you're taking these elements from klipas naiga, from your animal soul, and you're moving it to godliness, that's amazing. That's taking something that was used negatively and using it positively. That's ishapcha, that's transformative. That's an amazing, amazing power, and that's probably ultimately why God gave you those gifts. Because really, if God gave us a gift, he does want us to use it. He wants us to use it for him. So that's all on the animal side. I'm going to move now to the godly side. We also have fire, earth, wind, and water as the composition of our godly soul. But of course, in our godly soul, it's not arrogance and pleasures and depression. And so what is it? Is fire, earth, wind, and water are really the most basic powers that comprise our godly soul, the powers of a Jew. Fire is that thirst for God, that longing to be closer to God, which is really the core of what we call tshuva, returning to God. Now, of course, returning to God could be you did something wrong and you return to God, or turning to God could be returning to God. Just that thirst, that desire to get closer and closer, that's from the fire of your soul. Earth is stationary, doesn't budge. That's self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice is no matter what, this is what I'm doing, and whatever comes crashing on me is irrelevant. Of course, that's a very strong quality of our entire generation. Being Mashiach coming now, we're told we're the heels. On one hand, the lowest, but really with that real intense self-sacrifice for God. We don't always understand. We don't always feel. We're not always so sophisticated in our relationship, but we're stubborn. We're going to do what God wants no matter what. That comes from the earth element of the godly soul, that self-sacrifice, which is, of course, coming into Shabbos Mevorchim, Kislev, coming into Hanukkah, the whole miracle. It's all a miracle of people that were so stubborn and accepting the yoke of God's authority and self-sacrificing for God, though it makes no sense. And that's, of course, something that we live with probably on a daily basis. Fire, earth, wind. Wind is like we said, noise. It's not really grounded in anything. That's belief, right? We say belief begins where our knowledge, where our understanding stops. We have an obligation to understand God. It's a verse. It's a commandment. Das Elkei Avicha. Know the God of your father. Right? We try to do this in Tanya class. We try to understand God. And the more we understand, there's more and 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 more until we come to that point where we don't understand. And that's where we believe. And that emunah, bitachon, trust, faith, belief, that's the wind element of our soul. And of course, so much of our Judaism is based on the wind. Absolute belief, absolute trust, no matter what. And water, the downward flow, is the nullification to God. Which again, is like, this is so core. Our whole existence is the challenge of nullification to God. It says the soul's above. You think, like the joke is like, well, okay, now we're tired until after 120, then you can relax. No, the souls above are not relaxing either. They're also working. What are they working on? What's left to work on? Nullification to God. Nullification to God is limitless. So these fire, earth, wind, water, the movement toward God, the repentance, the thirst for God, the belief in God, the self-sacrifice for God, the nullification to God, these are the core components of the Jewish soul. And they're the fire, earth, wind, and water. So we have it in our physical world. We have it in the animal energies. We have it in the godly energies. Each one in a different manifestation to understand what makes a Jew. All right. Any thoughts on any of this? Sometimes it's interesting to look at yourself and try to understand, what's the composition of my animal? Or what are my strong points in my godly? Because, of course, everyone's recipe is different in terms of, do they have more fire, more earth, more wind, more water? Who am I? What is my powerful strengths? Or in my animal, what might seem as my weaknesses, but I could turn them around and those could be my powerful strengths in terms of my life, in terms of serving God.
I had a question. Wouldn't
Sure.
fire also be love of God? Wouldn't you be like that passionate? No?
Well, it could, that's an interesting question, Froma, because love of God, there's different loves. And there's loves compared to water, and there's loves compared to fire. A lot of times in Tanya, we speak of the fire-like love for God, Ava Aza Karishve Eish.
Right.
Fire-like love for God. So I don't, what? Many of these things can have many different levels of meaning. So as far as the source I saw, this is how it was sketched out. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And since we're talking about the core powers of our soul, it makes a lot of sense that one of the core powers of our soul is our love of God. So makes sense to me. I didn't see it inside, but that makes perfect sense. And just like in one context, this is what it represents. And then in another context, the same item has another layer of meaning.
Right.
So
Okay.
it could absolutely be.
Also, I don't know that if you mentioned, but it is Cheshvan, and I think just to connect that with Rebbe Rashab's, Mesiras Nefesh. Just
Absolutely. I did not mention, and absolutely, obviously, we definitely could we definitely could connect that. And also the Rebbe Rashab in terms of really paving the road of Mashiach. As we think of the fiery messages of the Rebbe in terms of Mashiach, he could really trace them back, starting with the Rebbe Rashab. The Rashab was the one that said, we, the Rabbeim, we are the house of David. We're it. Do you want to know who's the house of David? It's the Rabbeim. It's the Chabad leaders and his whole establishing of Tomchei Tmimim, right? This is I don't know if the girls' schools, but on the boys' side, this is like a huge day in all the boys' schools because the Rebbe Rashab started the network, what became the network of Lubavitch Yeshiva. So why did he start the network of Lubavitch Yeshivas? Because he had a desire, as we're saying, to bring Mashiach. And he knew that by studying the inner dimension of Torah, you, on one level, achieve a Mashiach reality now, because with your mind's eye, you see God. And of course, that's what Mashiach is. And through with your mind's eye seeing God, you can transfer to literally seeing God, which is the idea of Mashiach. So definitely what we're saying here totally relates to the Rebbe Rashab, because all of Chassidus is really helping move us to that point where we're not just conceptualizing all of these ideas and conceptualizing more and more and more, as I was saying, to understand God, to understand God, to understand God, to understand our soul, to understand the dynamics of the world. All of this is really a transfer point to see it with our very physical eyes, which is the reality of Mashiach, which is where all this is going to. So thank you for bringing in the Rebbe Rashab, and definitely that's very, very appropriate in a Tanya class on Chav Cheshvan. The Rebbe continues. Now we are on the next page, page Vav. V'gam midas tovos shebeteva kodesh b'toldosam, and also the good traits by nature inherent in the nature of a Jew, kimo rachmanos v'gemilas chasadim. The nature of a Jew, the Jewish animal. The Jew is a compassionate animal. The Jew is an animal. We're talking about their animal soul that likes to do kindness. Ba'os mimena comes from our animal soul. Ki b'Yisrael nefesh zu de klipa, because by the Jew, this soul, which is klipa, klipa means there's a barrier. It's not godly. It's concealed. It's constricted. The godliness is covered over. Hime klipas noiga. But remember, it's a barrier that's noiga, that the light of God shines through, that I can access the godliness through those barriers. Sheish ba gam kein tov. And therefore, since there's the noiga, since there's the shine of God, there's good. If there's God, there's good. And this concept, the confusion, the mingling, not black, not white, the grays, this comes from the mystery, from the esoteric mystery of the tree of knowledge. So the Rebbe put a lot in here, some of which I, so to speak, pre-taught when I was reminding you about Klipas Noiga and talking about our animal soul. So continuing understanding our animal soul, which is what we're doing here till the end of the chapter, then we can talk about our godly soul for chapter 2, 3, 4, 5. We are reminding ourselves our animal soul is the animal soul of a Jew. That means it's Klipas Noiga. That means there's this shine of God through it. And that means, and it's a very powerful point that I think we can all understand, that means Jews aren't actually good people. Is that like egotistical to say that? It's understanding who we are. A Jew's animal is a klipas noiga animal. A Jew's body is a klipas noiga body. Klipas noiga means, as I just said and as I just read, that there's a noiga, the shine of God is experienced through the films, through the veils, through the filters. Again, klipas tmeos, it's a wall. Of course there's God behind it. If there wasn't God, it wouldn't be. But I can't access the God. It's a wall. Cannot penetrate it. Klipas noiga means there's veils. So the light is shining through the veil. So the Rebbe says, what does that mean practically? It means a Jew by nature, not by godly nature, by animal nature, is a good person. A Jew is a good person. Why? Because if I was a good person by virtue of a godly soul, then I'm a good person if I listen to my godly soul. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. But a Jew has to be a good person because the animal of a Jew experiences God's light. We see this concept in the Talmud. It says in the Talmud that the nature of a Jew is to be, it says actually three things. Alter Rebbe here listed two. Baishanim, Rachmanim, and Gomle Chasadim. Baishanim means we're naturally embarrassed. Rachmanim means we're naturally compassionate. And Gomle Chasadim means we naturally do kindness. I'm sure all of us at some point heard of this beautiful essay Mark Twain wrote on the Jew. Nowadays there's Google, so you can find it in a second on your phone or device. And it really is a beautiful essay. He actually wrote it because he was accused, based on something else he wrote, of being an anti-Semite. Not, of course, a new phenomenon, but he said, I'm not. And in response to that, he wrote this beautiful, beautiful expression of the Jew. What was Mark Twain talking about? Because I read The Animal Soul of the Jew. What Jews did he know? What Jews was he seeing in rural America of the 1800s? Not religious Jews. He was seeing Jews. A Jew, the nature of a Jew is to be a good person, because the nature of a Jew is klipas noiga. In the Talmud, which is a source for this concept of the Jew having this naturally good nature, it speaks of an incident that happened where a collectors are not modern day phenomena. In the times of the Talmud, it was very common, especially the Jews from Israel, because Israel was very impoverished under the Romans, very persecuted. And the people that lived there with self-sacrifice to be in the Holy Land to learn God's Torah. So people would come from Israel to collect money for the poor of Israel from their much wealthier compatriots, from their brethren in Babylonia. And there was such a collector that once went to a certain town, village, shtetl in Babylonia, and no one would give him anything. He went knocking from door to door, and he didn't get any money from the entire town. And he declared, he said, these people aren't Jewish. He didn't say they're stingy, they have poor education. He said they're not Jewish. So it can't be. He said Jews are kind, compassionate people. If you see someone who's not kind and compassionate, you wonder about their Judaism. Now, in the Talmud, it actually says 3 qualities, and the Alter Rebbe here said 2. It says compassionate and kind, and it also says naturally embarrassed, by shunim, have a certain humility, which the Alter Rebbe does not list, because that doesn't come from our animal soul. Actually, Jews by nature have a more, as we would call it, chutzpahdik, impudent nature, right? The Torah defines us as am kshe oirev, a stick-necked people, which we can use for bad or for good, a stick-necked people. So why does the Talmud say we're naturally by shunim? We have this embarrassment, like this sort of like refinement to us. We're told that comes from the impact of Torah. As we study Torah, Torah refines us, changes our nature, and gives us the nature of baishanus, of being embarrassed of wrong. But that's not coming from our animal soul. So the Alter doesn't talk about that. That comes from Torah. But from the animal of a Jew, which is why Mark Twain could talk about it, about Jews who are not religious, which we could look at Jews of the world today, from the 15 million Jews, how many are religious? But look at the Jews of the world. Look at their compassion for Jews. Look at their compassion for Israel. Look at their generosity and charity. Where are they getting it from? Because they're listening to their godly soul. If they're listening to their godly soul, they also keep kosher. If they were listening to their godly soul, they'd keep Shabbos. So not kosher, not Shabbos, but why charity? Because they don't have to be listening to their godly soul to give charity. That's their animal. That's the animal of a Jew, is to be a kind, compassionate person. That's our nature. And if a Jew isn't kind and compassionate, again, it doesn't mean they're not listening to their godly, because you can be kind and compassionate for your animal. It's like they're Jewish. If they are, they got really messed up somewhere. They got to really, something warped their real nature, because that's the nature of the animal of the Jew. And the Rebbe is saying this for us to really understand, what does it mean, a Jewish animal soul? It means this admixture of godliness and evil. Yeah, it's an animal, evil, klipa, covering, but klipas noiga, that the godliness is shining through, and therefore there is natural good. And it doesn't mean you're listening to your godly soul. It means this is you in your animal nature. Now, of course, I mentioned before charity. I mean, you could give charity from your godly soul, and you could say, I don't have money, but God wants, and I have to give 10%, and the Rebbe wants more than 20%, and I'm giving because this is what God wants. That's listening to your godly soul. And of course, we can do kindness. I don't feel like it, and I'm not in the mood, and I'm tired, but I know this is what God wants from me, and I push myself to do it. It's listening to my godly soul. But we're saying, even on the level of the animal of a Jew, we're kind and compassionate people, because it's klipas noiga. And the Rebbe says, where do we get this from? That from the animal is good? That sounds so bizarre. The Rebbe says, this is the mystery of Chet Tzadas. Meaning, originally, this was a world of godliness. When we want to think of it in colors, it was a world of white with one piece of black, called the snake. The black snake was the incarnate of evil, and it was a white world otherwise. And then there was this tree of knowledge, the tree of knowledge, which caused the blending, the mixture. And because we have this mixture and this blending, that's how we could have that absolute white and that black in the same composition. So it's klipas noiga. It's klipa. It's the black. It's the barriers. And it's noiga, the white. God's light is shining through. And that creates the animal of the Jew as a good, kind, compassionate human being, even if they don't know they're Jewish, even if they never got a Jewish education, even if they have no clue what God wants from them or what God is or who they are. It's their nature. It's the animal soul of a Jew. Any thoughts on this? I'm sure we probably all had those experiences where we've seen Jews that know like nothing and are so kind and generous. Hopefully we all have had those experiences because that is the nature of a Jew.
Well, two things that happened in Israel this week. One of the people that came out of Gaza was tortured the most, and his name is Rom. Was really, I mean, he told his story for like 45 minutes on one of the news channels, and so they asked to help him financially so they can care for him psychologically. I mean, he's really, really messed up. And so it's like people, I mean, within few days raised so much money, I mean, few million shekel. And then another guy lost his brother and mother over the October 7th. He's all by himself, all alone. He's getting married. And so again, people just pour their hearts and I mean, all kind of things. Somebody's getting married and they don't have a car. It's like amazing how people pour their hearts and So very, very Rahmanim. Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and we should always see that and celebrate that and know that that's true. That is a Jew. And again, you could say, well, I'm thinking of that Jew I know, and I don't see that so much in them. It's a Jew that got so hurt by exile that they don't even know who they really are, not even aware of what their real nature is. Because this is the nature of the Jew. It's like it speaks in the Talmud of Hillel and Shammai discussing the bride. Is the bride always beautiful, seems beautiful, doesn't seem beautiful. And this is, of course, allegorical for the Jewish people, that a Jew is so beautiful, but sometimes exile comes and makes us look ugly. Sometimes exile distorts the beauty. So what you see doesn't look beautiful, but that's a distortion. Like Rachel is saying about the person that got so harmed in Gaza, distortion of who they really are. When we strip away the veneers of exile, the Kala is always beautiful. The bride's always beautiful. The Jew's always beautiful. It's literally our nature from our animal. You don't even have to be a godly person. From our animal, that's the nature of the Jew. So the Rebbe now, to conclude the chapter, we're actually at the final point, exciting, again, we are going into this to fully understand, because we've been discussing our animal soul. We said, if you remember, that we have these two souls. That's a big innovation of this chapter. One of those foundational innovations of the chapter is we have these two souls, and we are rather quickly understanding the animal to now spend chapters, starting from chapter 2, on the godly. So to conclude our discussion on the animal, we now talk about the non-Jew. The reason we're talking about the non-Jew is as a contrast point. To really understand the Jewish animal soul, let's understand what the non-Jewish animal soul is. So just to sketch it out briefly before we read inside, there's two differences spiritually between the Jew and the non-Jew. The Jew and the non-Jew are literally different stratas, meaning we think of as the stratas are doimim, tzomeach, chai, medaber, inanimate, vegetation, animal, man, and Jew. Sometimes we use man as Jew, or man as all humans, and sometimes it's man, and then it's Jew. Because we are different creatures. Because on the inside, spiritually, there's these two foundational differences between the wiring of a Jew and the wiring of a non-Jew. And that's why we're different species, who God made to look very similar. So there's challenge. God does so many things for our challenge, for our growth, for overcoming the barriers and the obstacles. But if God didn't do this, we are told we would look very different. Like the whole concept of a human being on two legs when all animals are on four is because the Jew looks up to the sky. We're not on 2 legs, because you're on 4 legs. Sorry, you look down at the ground. And if you're on 2, you look up to the heavens. You look up to God. And that's why the Jew is on 2 legs. So why is the non-Jew on 2 legs? Challenge. So we shouldn't look so different. So we could be fooled. So we could overcome the fool, overcome the disguise, overcome what seemingly is so similar. So what's the difference? 2 differences. One difference is that only a Jew possesses a godly soul. This is the definition of the Jew. As we said, this is a foundational innovation of this chapter. No, you are a godly soul. Look in the mirror. You are looking at a piece of God. You are looking at the essence of God. You're looking at a godly soul. Only a Jew has a godly soul. That's not natural. That's not normal. It's not like they should have it, but they lost it, got it taken away from them. It's like a piece of the Creator. Are we creation? Are we creator? Well, we're creation. But inside of us, in the core of our soul, it's creator. So only the Jew has the godly soul. Non-Jew does not have a godly soul. And the second difference is the Jew and the non-Jew have an animal soul, but the animal soul is very different between a Jew and a non-Jew. Because everything we were just emphasizing and explaining and elaborating on, the nature of the animal of the Jew coming from Klipas Noiga, is only the nature of the animal of the Jew. A non-Jew, their animal soul is Klipas Timeos. Just like that wall, that you can't access the godliness behind that wall, that is the nature of the animal of the non-Jew. So the Jew Klipas Noiga, the non-Jew Klipas Timeos. The Jew, the animal of a Jew, God's energy is manifest. The animal of the non-Jew, God's energy is not manifest. And obviously from those 2 differences come many, 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 many differences. And obviously it's more nuanced than that, but I just wanted to give a little bit of background, and then we'll start reading, and then we'll explain more. So in contrast, this is not so the nature of the soul of the Gentile. It's actually interesting because someone once asked the Rebbe that this idea that the Alter Rebbe is explaining, this innovation of the Alter Rebbe, so to speak, the difference between the Jew and the non-Jew, some German philosopher, whose name I forget, writes this as well. And when this person was studying this philosophy, and he's like, wait, this philosopher knows this, the Alter Rebbe knows this, like, we thought it's, the Alter Rebbe. And the Rebbe says that, he also learned that German philosopher. The Rebbe studied in Berlin. And he also saw that point, and he said, you got to understand, the German philosopher was able to write this because the Alter Rebbe put it in Tanya. Since it's in Tanya, it trickled into the world to the degree that a German philosopher can pick this up as well. And he can also write about this foundational difference between the Jew and the non-Jew. It's that obvious, thanks to it being in the Tanya. Hey, Mishar Klipas Timeos are from the rest of the klipos, of those shells, of those husks, of those barriers that are absolutely impure, that the light does not penetrate at all. Shem Bem Tov Kalal, that there's no visible good at all. Obviously, there's godliness within Klipas Timeos, because if there wasn't godliness, it wouldn't exist, but not a godliness we can access at all. As is written there in the Eitz Chaim, the works of Reb Chaim Vital, who's recording the Kabbalah, the esoteric teachings of the Arizal of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. What is written there? The Chol Tivu de Avdin Ha'umos Ligarmuhi Avdin. All the good of the nations of the world, they're doing that good for themselves. Meaning a person could question and say, wait a minute, I know so-and-so, 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 or there are many so-and-sos in the world that do good. And if we're saying they don't have a godly soul and their animal soul has no accessible good, how could non-Jews do good? And they do. So the Eitz Chaim, Reb Chaim Vital, recording this teaching of the Arizal Kadosh, is saying, yes, a non-Jew can do good, but that non-Jews' good always has to be serving themselves. I think, nowadays when they have all those personality, I don't know what they call them, ways of graphing different personalities, they say, whatever it's worth, I don't know, that like 1/9, if you would, I guess, divide the world evenly among these 9 traits of people in the world, like their desire, their need is to do good, to feel good about themselves. Like what makes them tick, what makes them feel good. Thank God, and they're doing good. That's wonderful. But the reason they're doing good is because that's what they need. And of course, that makes a lot of sense because we also sometimes do good to make ourselves feel good, or we might do good and then realize how good we feel from doing good. What makes you feel better than helping someone else? So if a person's not feeling very good about themselves and they help someone else and they feel good, that's wonderful, and it is wonderful. And we're very happy for every human being that does good for whatever reason. But it's not coming altruistically. It can't. A regular non-Jew, not a Noachide, we will not today, next week, discuss the Noachide, but a regular non-Jew doesn't have the capacity to do good altruistically. Now, could a Jew also do good for self-centered reasons? Of course, and sometimes we do. But we have the option of doing good from our godly soul. And even from our animal soul, we could do good, for the sake of good, for the sake of the unfortunate, not for ourselves. Because even the animal soul of the Jew, the light of God shines through. So a Jew could sink to the lowest level of doing good and do good as a self-serving occupation, activity, practice, and at least we're doing good, so that's also good. Or we could do good because we have an animal soul, and my animal soul naturally has compassion for the unfortunate. Or we could do good as a piece of God and as a reflection of God's energy. We have all three options. The regular non-Jew, non-Noachite, not B'nai Noach non-Jew, doesn't have the higher two options. They can't do it only from compassion for the unfortunate, or let alone as a reflection of God. Their only option is doing good to serve self. And that is what is recorded here in the writings of Reb Chaim Vital, teaching us the Kabbalah of the Arizal. And this is, so that's a Kabbalistic source. We also see this in the revealed Torah, as we're taught in the Talmud on the verse. It says, and the kindness of the nations is a sin. And that's like, well, I don't want the nations to be kind. I do want the nations to be kind. And it's very good when the nations are kind. So why are we saying the kindness of the nations is a sin? So the Talmud explains, what does that verse mean? That all the charity, all the kindness that the nations of the world do, is only for self-glorification, which in essence is saying the same concept as Reb Chaim Vital is saying on the side of Kabbalah. The sages in the Talmud are saying from the revealed aspect of Torah. So both in the revealed body of Torah and in the esoteric dimension of Torah, it's the same message, but the Alter Rebbe is now unpacking the core of that because their animal soul is klipas tmeos. That limits the option. So even good is coming through klipas tmeos. So it has to be self-serving. There is no other option. What about a Noachide? We'll discuss that next week.